and release of creatures. And in this course of procedure across Asia, this deity became feminine, and is as feminine is recognized today among all Buddhist peoples. This constant motion, therefore, toward the feminine principle as beauty, as love, and of grace, of forgiveness, of kindness, of dedication, resulted in the Northern School developing an interpretation of the Buddhist teaching which is essentially happy, a joyous philosophy, a philosophy not built upon death or martyrdom, or sorrow or loss, but a philosophy based upon fulfillment, based upon the idea that doing the right thing is the most wonderful and radiant way to be happy. Then only one problem remained: how to know what is the right thing, and how to find ways of understanding it. And to meet this, we have the story of the birth of Buddha, in which a certain number of very interesting factors not generally considered enter. According to one of the fables, and there are many, by the way, and some of them are in apparent conflict, but not if you think them through. In the beginning, Surya, the god of the sun, this being the infinite light, not the light that is physical or temporal, but the light that comes with every being who comes into the world. This light, Surya, approached the queen of a little kingdom in what is now southern Nepal, and being a very courteous thing, never being bombastic or tyrannical or despotic, the eternal light asked Maya the privilege of being born through her. He wouldn't do it. It wouldn't do it if she didn't want it that way. And at first she rather objected to the idea. But after a very beautiful story was told, she accepted and agreed that she would become the mother of the embodiment. Now, what was going to be embodied? In one school, the embodied being was a bodhisattva, a being approaching perfection, who had voluntarily accepted the ministry of coming into the world for the redemption of mankind. Another view of the entire principle was quite different. Instead of being a person, this Buddha was actually Bodhi. In other words, infinite soul power, seeking to be born as the Redeemer of all that lives. Now, in the categories, particularly those we find also in Yoga and Vedanta, we have a triad of which Bodhi represents infinite benevolence. Bodhi is the love that has no imperfection, no distortion, no selfishness, no self-interest. It is infinite love, infinitely manifesting throughout space as the proof of the presence of the divine power. In other words, manifesting always through love. The eternal light comes into the life of the individual. Therefore, the immaculate birth of Buddha is also very symbolical of the immaculate birth of truth in the human soul. This is the purpose of the story. It is that we should suddenly come to realize that we must personally accept the invitation to bring into our own lives and through our lives into the world a manifestation of infinite love. Now, in the story, of course, we have the case of the Immaculate Conception again. The Buddha enters into Maya's body through the right side on a lotus throne supported by an elephant, which was Ganesha, the symbol of wisdom, the symbol of propriety. In the Indian mythology, Ganesha was quite an interesting character who gradually became much involved in merchandising. But the real truth behind Ganesha was wisdom, but wisdom as integrity. Wisdom was useless if it did not create honor. Wisdom was meaningless if the wise were not good. Now, wisdom assumedly cannot be attained without virtue. Therefore, worldly wisdom, as we find in the story of Pilgrim's Progress, can't be real wisdom at all. But in wisdom, the Bodhisattva was brought into the body of Mahamaya. And at that same instant, a blue lotus flower was placed in her hand as the symbol of the Annunciation. And of course it's interesting that in many European figures the Virgin Mary at the time of the Annunciation is given a lily by the angel. This lily is again part of the same thing. And in the case also Mahamaya, we find another interesting parallel. She is associated very closely with the moon, which in a mysterious way is under her feet. Anyway, Mahamaya becomes the mother of the Buddha. She is purity, becoming the mother of truth. She is that which is undefiled, becoming the basis and the power of redemption. And undefiled means finally and ultimately that all conduct is motivated by integrity, that all affection is honorable, and that in love and love alone can the true human being be brought into embodiment with the greatest potential for growth. Now the time came, and the king of the little country, where Maya was the queen, knew of the story and became acceptant of it, and believed her account. And in due time, when her term was complete, they went to a beautiful garden called the Lumbini Garden near his palace, where grew the painless tree, the tree that there was no suffering. She reached up her hand to pick a branch from this tree, and the child was born from her right side. Now this is quite an interesting account for the reason that in all probabilities we have to understand that Gautama Buddha was born or delivered by a cesarean delivery. This is the only thing that would account for the detail, and also account for the fact that it's carefully recorded that the mother died within 7 days. This would prove very likely true of a cesarean done at that time. So we find that instead of being brought up by his mother, he was brought up by his aunt. And this aunt became also the wife of the king, and together they raised the child. Now in this particular story we find another interesting thing, which I think tells us something of the mythology involved. When the child was born, at the moment of birth, it was caught in a cloth held by the gods Indra and Brahma. And at the same time the skies opened and the dragons of space anointed the child. Then, as only a few minutes old, the child walked, and he took 7 steps in each of the 4 directions, and then returned to his native infancy. And the Chinese indicated these steps by putting a flower where each one of the 7 footprints in each direction was placed. And in the old woodblock prints, the flowers are arranged in the form of the cross. This is another interesting point that has generally been ignored. But it is all part of a story that goes far deeper than we're inclined to think. Actually, the continuation of the life of Buddha goes into a whole complication of situations. His aunt who raised him becomes one of his first converts, and this is regarded as an indication of his true attitude on conversion. Also his own son, who was called the delayer or the postponer, was converted. And Rahula was born on the day in which Buddha received enlightenment. All these stories all fit together to make a story. They're very important. Actually, therefore, we find the development of the boy following a concept of picture, following the ancient customs always, but strangely breaking through them into the destiny that was intended. In the Indian Eastern situation of Buddhism, we find, therefore, many accounts of Mahamaya. At the time of the child's birth and her own decease, she retired from the world into the Tushita heaven, where Buddha himself had waited for embodiment. This heaven was 33 steps above the earth. And when Buddha came back to his father's house to preach and convert the king after he had finished his own enlightenment, one of the first things that he did was to ascend the 33 steps and preach the doctrine of redemption to his own mother. This was his second contact with her. There was one contact after this, after his own death. After Buddha died and the disciples had gathered about the great wooden casket in which the body was placed prior to cremation, the mother, attended by celestial beings, descended from the Tushita heaven to mourn for the death of her son. And as she stood beside the casket in prayer and weeping, the casket opened and the Buddha rose to console her. Therefore he rose from the dead to bless his own mother. These legends and these fables go on and on and on, but they are all trying to tell us something. And it is what they're trying to tell us, it seems to me, that is the most important of all. Actually, in the 8th century A.D., the Buddhist monk Kobodaichi went to China, where he received enlightenment, and where he brought back to Japan a great many relics and sacred things belonging to the Chinese Buddhist assembly. Among the things that he brought back was a tiny image of Maya Bunin, the mother of Buddha. And this image was placed in a little temple that was built on a hill overlooking the city of Kobe in Japan. And this is called the White Moon Temple, or the Temple of the Lunar Crescent. And this temple is still in existence from the 8th century, and is either now in the Shingon or the Tendai jurisdiction, perhaps both. And every year there is a special and wonderful ceremony given there to honor the mother of Buddha. It is the only temple so dedicated, I guess, in Japan as far as we know, although she occurs in much of the sacred art of the country. But anyway, once a year there is a special ceremony for her at night, and a great procession of followers, both men and women, carrying torches, go up the pathway leading up the side of this mountain to the temple. And it's a very unusual spectacle and very dramatic and moving to see these rows of lights climbing up to the abode of Maya Bunin. Anyway, the entire story now goes back to a series of principles. And I think we all need the realization that mystic Buddhism, esoteric Buddhism, has always more or less held that the whole story comes back to the individual. That the individual, we are all, in one way or another, bodhisattvas in the making. Some have gone further than others, but all, regardless of their estates, are on the way to perfection, on the way to the completion of the universal purpose for which they were intended. And this is one of the points that is quite a situation between Eastern and Western thinking. The Eastern mind has a concept, at least, of what the intentional end is. In the West, this concept seems to be almost completely lacking. The average individual going through life does not know why things happen to him. He does not know how to handle problems that arise. And when he approaches the end of life, he doesn't know where he's going or what the future holds. In the Orient, conjecture at least, symbolic thinking, has brought certain consolation